So I last made a video called "Have we finally lost to climate change?" and the comment section was interesting. Aside from the climate deniers, by far some of the most popular sentiments were from climate doomers. In fact, this recurring theme came up quite a lot, so I thought I'd take a step back and address climate doomerism head-on. Here's why I don't think climate doomerism is the answer to our climate, social, or ecological crises. Humans love apocalyptic stories. I mean, they're literally everywhere. From Christians believing in the apocalypse and Day of Judgment, to everyone in 2012 suddenly believing the world was going to end because it was the end of the 5,126-year-long cycle in the Mesoamerican long count calendar. I feel like we're always surrounded by tales of our upcoming doom. It's of no wonder then that a particular brand of apocalyptic story has begun to rear its head as a result of the climate crisis. Climate doomerism. But how much merit does doomerism actually have? Well, it does get one thing right: the climate and ecological crises are terrifying, and there has already been a lot of harm to life on Earth as a result of them. For a start, most ecologists agree that we are in a sixth mass extinction event, with the UN's IPBES report estimating around 1 million plants and animals could be threatened with extinction, more than ever before in human history. This astounding loss of biodiversity could cause entire ecosystems to collapse, threatening the very systems we have built our way of life around. But there's more than just the ecological crisis to worry about. After all, the climate crisis is in full swing, with 2024 being the hottest year yet on record, estimated at 1.6 degrees higher than pre-industrial levels. That means we've broken the 1.5 degrees threshold that was calculated to be the maximum sustainable amount of long-term warming the planet could reach without devastating consequences. Already, people across the world, especially in global south countries, have been feeling the devastating impacts of the climate crisis. Wildfires, floods, droughts, hurricanes and storms, and the list goes on. Yeah, it's not looking good. So with all of this going on, I completely understand why people feel so hopeless and have turned to doomerism, especially those who are already directly facing the impacts of the climate crisis. For after all, what can the average person do when governments don't listen, when corporations keep ploughing on their path of consumerism and planetary destruction, when the average person is just trying to get by, to work, to pay the bills, to get the impossible access to healthcare that they need, to support their family and friends, to navigate the complexities of life under late-stage capitalism, all whilst already being pummeled by the impacts of the climate crisis, especially if living in the global south. It's no wonder that we turn to doomerism, because we feel powerless, we feel that it's already too late. And maybe that's true. We've already reached a level of warming that's having irreversible consequences across the entire planet. Coral reefs bleaching, droughts meaning crops are getting harder to grow, and increasing natural disasters wrecking people's homes and lives. However, there are quite a few specific arguments the doomerists throw around that I don't quite agree with. For a start, not everything is irreversible. Not all hope is lost. Trees can be replanted, ecosystems restored, disruptive and prefigurative actions taken to create a better world. Even coral reefs can be restored to become more climate resilient. Further than that, I want to take a deep dive into a few of the arguments the doomers make, which I have specific bones to pick with. Let's get started. One argument I often see floating around is that humans might as well go extinct because the Earth will be better without us. Yeah, I don't think that's true. Humans, after all, can and have long lived in harmony with the planet. Indigenous peoples have been caring for the environment and even increasing biodiversity for centuries. In fact, there is a very high overlap between indigenous territories and regions of high biodiversity. For example, IFLs, or intact forest landscapes, are seamless mosaics of forest and naturally treeless ecosystems which exhibit no sign of human activity or habitat fragmentation and are large enough to maintain all native biodiversity. It is estimated that 36% of these highly valuable habitats are within indigenous peoples' lands. And more specifically, indigenous people often hold a great amount of knowledge and experience when it comes to species-level conservation. For example, the Anishinaabe, sorry if I mispronounced that, people in the Great Lakes area of the US and Canada are leaders in the conservation of wild rice. Indigenous people working as scientists in their tribes often share their experience working with elders to understand the historical implications of the work they do to study and conserve wild rice. In addition, Indigenous people have long known how to live and feed themselves sustainably in harmony with the planet, such as through the North American agricultural practice of the Three Sisters, where corn, beans, and squash are grown together. The beans fertilize the soil by fixing nitrogen for the corn and squash. Meanwhile, they can also wind around the corn stalks. And finally, the squash leaves provide ground cover, which helps prevent weeds from taking over. In fact, this method has actually been shown to have positive benefits for the soil in comparison to monocropping, including increasing short-term soil respiration, as well as decreasing extractable soil nitrate, which can lessen the impact on water quality. So to sweep all of humanity under one brush with a statement that humans only harm the planet is an inaccurate generalization. And it's not just Indigenous peoples who can have a positive impact on the planet. Everyone can. As we make more progress in science and take the time to listen to Indigenous communities, we are only increasing our knowledge of permaculture, regenerative agriculture, biophilic design, ecology, biodiversity, rewilding, habitat creation, and ecosystem restoration, which are all tools we can use to make the Earth a more biodiverse, beautiful, and bountiful place to live. After all, we are ecosystem engineers, just like beavers who build dams to flood forests, creating new habitats for fauna and flora to flourish. We too can build on and mold our environments to have a positive impact for both our own societies and the non-human life forms we share this Earth with. Wouldn't it be nice to live in an abundant world where we integrate ourselves into our ecosystems rather than living separately from them? But if the planet really isn't better off without us, then why is it in such the state that it is today? Well, I think the Earth isn't necessarily better off without us as a species, but it is better off without our toxic systems. I'm talking about late-stage capitalism, consumerism, infinite growth and expansion, colonialism, profiteering corporations, and the billionaires and states who uphold them. Those all need to go in the bin for the sake of our planet. Still, it is easy to feel hopeless in the face of all those existing structures of power. But I think that our emotions are a super valuable tool when it comes to taking climate action, which moves me on to my next anti-doomerism argument. Another common critique I've seen from doomers is that hope doesn't drive people to action, but fear and despair does. Personally, I've experienced plenty of fear, anger, and hope when it comes to our climate, social, and ecological crises. Usually, fear or despair spikes my anxiety into periods of short-term action, though these usually aren't very productive. Anger seems to be a more valuable negative emotion to me, and the rage I feel against the world and all of its systems usually gives me short bursts of productivity to actually do something. But long-term, it is hope that pushes me to keep coming back to try and build a better future. But that's just my personal experience, so I wanted to find out how emotions actually impact people's relations to climate actions on a larger scale. So I had a little dig through the literature and found this paper that analysed the situation quite thoroughly. As expected, psychology indicates that it's much more complicated than just one silver bullet emotion of hope or fear driving people towards climate action. Behavioural scientists at the University of Massachusetts Amherst published a paper in Nature Climate Change, which stated that the bifurcation between go positive and go negative simultaneously oversimplifies the rich base of research on emotion, whilst overcomplicated the very real communications challenge advocates face by demanding that each message have the right emotional recipe to maximise effectiveness. They followed on from this by making a few points. 1. Emotions aren't simple levers that can be pushed or pulled to obtain desired singular responses. For example, anger is an emotion often associated with aggressive responses, yet anger can also be used to motivate people to rectify social injustices. 2. Emotions evolve over time and should be considered as part of a feedback system rather than as direct drivers of behaviour. So we shouldn't assume any short-term impacts of climate messaging are indicative of long-term behavioural changes or consistent actions over time. 3. Most of the research already done on the emotional responses to climate communication and their link with action are correlational rather than causational. This means research might not provide useful insights into how explicitly targeting specific emotions through communication will actually produce the same behaviour. There's lots of discrepancy in the research, basically, with older research saying that appealing to hope is much more useful than appealing to fear, whilst newer experimental research suggests that appealing to optimism and hope might actually lower motivations to engage in mitigation efforts. 4. Different messages produce different emotional responses in different people. The same message might induce hope in one person, anger or fear in another, and leave the third completely unbothered. Yeah, don't I know that? 5. Due to all of the above points, it's more important to develop authentic communication strategies with regards to the climate than to try and socially engineer specific emotions. And if the power of emotional responses are used, then different messages should be designed to best meet different individuals' emotional, informational, and decision-making needs. Basically, there is no one size fits all, and therefore not just one emotion should be used to try and push everyone into action. So there we have it. Just as I shouldn't try and push a everything's going to be fine sugar-coated hope appeal on this channel, so too should the doomers not pretend that fear or despair alone are going to solve the crisis we are in. So how should we move past doomerism? Well, as we've just seen, there are some points as to why we should. 1. We can physically fix the planet. We have the technology and knowledge to do so, and we're only going to continue improving our abilities. 2. As a species, we do have the capacity to build a better world. We are not a doomed species who only causes suffering upon the earth. After all, indigenous communities and others have long lived in harmony with the planet. It is our systems that are causing our social, ecological, and climate crises, not humanity itself. 3. Fear and despair alone are not going to drive us into action. Communication and mobilization is a lot more complicated than that. And 4th, though not yet mentioned, we have a moral obligation to do so, especially those of us who are privileged or in the global north and have time and resources to invest into our communities. To move past doomerism, we need to understand that hope and action both have a space in this movement, alongside climate anxiety, fear and anger. And we can all perform tangible actions which will create short-term and long-term results, which will in turn improve all of our lives through mutual aid and solidarity. Whether that's creating a library of things with our neighbours, joining a guerrilla gardening group, volunteering with a community permaculture project, joining a housing cooperative, using public transport instead of a car, eating plant-based, attending people's assemblies, learning about horizontal organising, reading a book about anarchism, planting a tree, mending clothes at a repair workshop, and the list goes on and on and on and on and on. I understand, however, that it is incredibly difficult to have any hope if you're already directly being impacted by climate change, or the many other forms of violence inflicted by late-stage capitalism and the state. For many, there is only survival to think about. But for those of us who have even slightly more capacity than just to survive, work, or pay the bills, we need to invest that time into building a better world and prefiguring our society, rather than just giving up all hope and turning to doomerism. Heavy topics today, but thank you for watching. Let me know in the comments which positive or negative emotions drive you most towards action, or whether you have any tips for people as to how to not succumb to doomerism and keep the fight alive. See you in the next one. Bye!